Why patience is a sales superpower, and why most people will never have it. Here's something nobody tells you when you start selling. The deal you lost last month, the one you keep replaying in your head, wondering what you said wrong, what objection you failed to handle, there's a decent chance you didn't lose it because of anything you said. You lost it because you moved too fast. You pushed when the other person wasn't ready. You tried to close a conversation that hadn't even opened yet. And the worst part, you probably thought you were being efficient. You thought urgency was a virtue. You thought if you didn't press now, the opportunity would disappear. That instinct, that rush, is one of the most expensive mistakes a human being can make, not just in sales. In careers, in relationships, in building anything that matters. Let me explain why. Most people understand patience as waiting. Just sit there, be passive, don't push, let things happen. And honestly, if that's what patience meant, it would be terrible advice. Passivity kills momentum. Passivity kills businesses. If you just sit around waiting for clients to call you, waiting for opportunities to find you, you'll starve. But that's not what patience actually is. That's a shallow, lazy definition that confuses stillness with strategy. Real patience is not the absence of action. Real patience is the discipline to take the right action at the right time and to resist the wrong action when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to do something, anything, right now. And the reason most people can't do this, the reason most salespeople, most entrepreneurs, most professionals rush through relationships and burn through opportunities, has nothing to do with strategy. It has to do with what's happening inside their nervous system. Let me take you inside the brain for a moment, because this is where everything starts to make sense. When you're in a sales conversation, or a negotiation, or any high-stakes interaction where the outcome matters to you, your brain is doing something very specific. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that processes threat and anxiety, is monitoring the situation for danger signals. And here's the thing, uncertainty registers as danger. When you don't know whether someone is going to say yes or no, when you can't predict the outcome, your amygdala treats that ambiguity the same way it would treat a physical threat. Your heart rate increases, your palms get damp. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for strategic thinking, empathy, long-term planning, starts to get overridden. This is the fight-or-flight response. And in a sales context, fight looks like pushing harder, talking faster, throwing in discounts, adding pressure. Flight looks like giving up too early, going silent, avoiding the follow-up call because you're afraid of rejection. Neither of these is patience. Both of these are reactions driven by a brain that's trying to escape discomfort as quickly as possible. And this is the critical insight. Impatience is not a personality trait. It's a stress response. It's your nervous system trying to resolve uncertainty because uncertainty feels like pain. The dopamine prediction system in your brain, the same system that makes you check your phone 40 times a day, craves resolution. It wants to know the answer. It wants to close the loop. And when the loop stays open, when the client says, "Let me think about it," when the prospect goes quiet for a week, that open loop creates a neurochemical tension that most people simply cannot tolerate. So they act. They send the desperate follow-up email. They drop the price before anyone asked them to. They over-explain. They chase. And every time they do this, they communicate something very specific to the other person. They communicate neediness. They communicate that they need this deal more than the other person needs the solution. And the moment that power dynamic flips, the moment the buyer senses that you need them more than they need you, trust erodes. Perceived value drops. The relationship shifts from advisor and client to vendor and target. This is why the best closers in any industry tend to be the calmest people in the room, not because they don't care about the outcome. They care deeply. But they've trained themselves to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. They've built what psychologists call distress tolerance, the capacity to sit with uncertainty without collapsing into reactive behavior. And this isn't some mystical skill. This is trainable. This is a function of your prefrontal cortex learning to override your amygdala. Every time you feel the urge to push and you choose instead to pause, to ask one more question, to listen for 10 more seconds, you are literally strengthening a neural pathway. You are building the architecture of patience through repetition, the same way you'd build any other skill. Now let me connect this to something bigger, because patience isn't just a sales tactic. It's a worldview. Naval Ravikant talks about the idea that all returns in life, whether financial, relational, or intellectual, come from compound interest. And compound interest requires time. It requires patience. You can't compound something you keep interrupting. You can't build a reputation if you're constantly chasing short-term validation. You can't develop deep expertise if you jump to a new field every 6 months because the last one didn't pay off fast enough. The same principle applies to relationships with clients, with partners, with anyone whose trust you need. Trust compounds. Every interaction where you show up with genuine value, where you listen more than you talk, where you don't pressure someone into a decision they're not ready for, that's a deposit. And over time, those deposits accumulate into something that no amount of clever persuasion can manufacture: genuine credibility. Charlie Munger had a concept he used relentlessly: inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I close more deals?" ask, "What would guarantee that I lose every deal?" And the answer is almost always the same. Be desperate, be pushy, make it about your needs instead of theirs. Treat every conversation like a transaction instead of a relationship. Impatience is the common denominator in nearly every version of sales failure. Invert that and you get a powerful insight. The person who can afford to be patient, not passive, but genuinely patient, has an almost unfair advantage. Because patience signals something that cannot be faked. It signals that you have other options. It signals that you're not dependent on any single outcome. It signals confidence, not the performative kind, not the kind where you psych yourself up in the mirror, but the structural kind. The kind that comes from knowing your value doesn't depend on whether this particular person says yes today. And here's where this connects to something most people in sales never think about. There's a concept in the Talmudic business tradition about the difference between a merchant and a wise person. A merchant tries to sell what he has. A wise person first understands what the other person needs, and then determines whether what he has is the right fit. If it's not, he says so. He walks away, not because he doesn't want the money, but because he understands that one dishonest transaction destroys 10 future relationships. That kind of integrity takes patience. It takes the willingness to say, "This isn't the right time," or "I'm not the right fit for you," and trust that honesty will pay dividends later. And it almost always does, because people remember the person who didn't push. People remember the person who prioritized their interest over their own commission. And when those people do have a need that matches what you offer, they come back. Not because you chased them, but because you earned a place in their memory that no competitor can occupy. This is what I mean when I say patience is a superpower. It's not passive. It's not lazy. It's the hardest kind of discipline there is, the discipline to resist the short-term reward in favor of the long-term relationship. Now let me be very specific about how this works in practice, because theory without application is just philosophy, and philosophy doesn't pay the bills. Imagine you're a salesperson, or really, anyone who needs to convince another human being of something. You've had 3 meetings with a prospect. Good conversations, they seem interested, they've asked smart questions, you've provided value, and then, silence. A week goes by, no response to your email, no return call. This is the moment where patience either lives or dies. The impatient response, and this is what 90% of people do, is to send a follow-up that sounds something like, "Hey, just checking in. Wanted to see if you've had a chance to think about our proposal. Happy to answer any questions." On the surface, this seems reasonable. professional, even, but what does it actually communicate? It communicates that you're anxious. It communicates that you're watching your inbox. It communicates that this deal matters to you more than it might matter to them. And it shifts the dynamic in a direction that makes closing harder, not easier. The patient response is different. The patient response recognizes that silence doesn't mean rejection. Silence usually means the other person is busy, or thinking, or dealing with something that has nothing to do with you. The patient response is to wait, but not to wait passively. Instead, you use that time to add value. Maybe you send an article relevant to their industry. Maybe you share a case study that addresses a concern they raised in your last meeting. Maybe you simply make a note to follow up in 2 weeks instead of 2 days, and when you do, you lead with something useful rather than something needy. This is the difference between a follow-up and a chase. A follow-up adds value. A chase extracts attention. People can feel the difference instantly, even if they can't articulate it. And over time, the person who follows up with value builds a relationship. The person who chases builds resentment. Let me give you another scenario, because this principle extends far beyond traditional sales. Say you're a freelancer, a developer, a designer, a consultant, whatever. You've just finished a project for a client. It went well. They're happy with the result. Now the impatient move is to immediately pitch them on the next project. Hey, since this went well, I was thinking we could also do X, Y, Z, and sometimes that works. But more often, it feels transactional. It makes the client wonder whether you were genuinely focused on their project or already thinking about the next invoice. The patient move is to deliver the work, ask for feedback, make sure they're satisfied, and then step back. Let them experience the value of what you built. Let them show it to their colleagues. Let them get compliments on it. Let the results speak. And then 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, when they realize they need help with the next thing, who are they going to call? The person who pressured them, or the person who delivered excellence and then gave them space. This is compound trust in action. And it's the same mechanism whether you're selling software, selling consulting, or selling yourself in a job interview. Now I want to address something directly because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, this sounds great, but I have bills to pay. I can't afford to be patient. I need revenue now. And I hear that. I genuinely do. I've been there. I know what it feels like when your bank account is making the decisions instead of your brain. But here's what I've learned, and this is something I had to learn the hard way. Desperation is the most expensive emotion in business. When you act from desperation, you discount your prices, you take on clients who aren't a good fit, you say yes to projects that drain your energy and destroy your reputation. You trade long-term positioning for short-term survival, and the result is that you end up in the same desperate position 6 months later, except now you're also exhausted and your brand is diluted. Patience doesn't mean you ignore your financial reality. Patience means you refuse to let your financial anxiety override your strategic judgment. It means you find ways to sustain yourself, a side project, a temporary engagement, a smaller contract, while you continue to build the relationships and the reputation that will generate real, sustainable revenue. It means you play the long game even when the short game is screaming at you. And this is where most people break, not because they lack talent, not because they lack knowledge, but because they lack the emotional endurance to stay in the process when results aren't visible yet. They quit the follow-up sequence after 3 attempts because it's not working. They abandon their content strategy after 2 months because nobody's watching. They drop the relationship building because it doesn't show up on this quarter's spreadsheet. But compound interest doesn't show up on any spreadsheet until suddenly it does. Until suddenly the client you've been nurturing for 8 months refers you to their CEO. Until suddenly the article you wrote 6 months ago gets shared by someone with an audience. Until suddenly the reputation you've been quietly building becomes the reason someone chooses you over 14 other options without even comparing prices. This is what Naval means when he says you should play long-term games with long-term people. The entire framework of wealth creation, real wealth, not quick cash, is built on the assumption that you can sustain effort and relationships over time without needing immediate gratification. And the people who can do this aren't just luckier or more talented. They've simply trained their nervous system to tolerate a longer delay between effort and reward. Let me explain how you actually build this capacity, because knowing that patience matters isn't the same as being able to practice it. And the gap between knowing and doing is where most advice fails. The first step is recognizing your triggers. What specific situations cause you to rush? Is it when a prospect goes silent? Is it when you see a competitor posting about a win? Is it when your revenue dips for a month? You need to identify these triggers clearly, because you can't manage a response you haven't named. The second step is creating a buffer between the trigger and the response. This is what neuroscientists call the pause. When you feel the urge to send that desperate email, to cut your price, to push for a decision, you stop. Not forever, just for a beat. You take a breath. You ask yourself, am I acting from strategy or from anxiety? That question alone will change your behavior more than any sales training program. The third step is building what I call a patience infrastructure. This means having systems in place that allow you to be patient without being passive. A CRM where you track your follow-ups on a reasonable schedule. A content pipeline where you're consistently putting value into the world so that opportunities come to you instead of you chasing them. A financial buffer, even a small one, that gives you the psychological freedom to say no to bad deals. Patience isn't just a mindset, it's an environment you design. The fourth step, and this is the one most people skip, is redefining what progress looks like. If you measure progress only by closed deals and revenue, you'll always feel behind. You'll always feel impatient. But if you expand your definition to include relationships deepened, value delivered, trust built, skills improved, and positioning strengthened, then every single day offers evidence of forward motion. And that evidence is what sustains you through the long stretches where the external results haven't caught up yet. This connects directly to something from the science of deliberate practice. Anders Ericsson's research showed that experts don't just practice more, they practice differently. They focus on the edge of their ability. They seek immediate feedback. They correct errors in real time. And crucially, they sustain this process over years, not weeks. Patience in this framework isn't passive waiting. It's sustained, deliberate engagement with a process whose results are delayed. It's the willingness to show up for the 10,000th repetition, even though the payoff might not come until the 12,000th. And the people who can do this in sales, in skill building, in relationship development, are the ones who end up with advantages that look like talent, but are actually the product of endurance. There's a fascinating parallel in the science of creativity here as well. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research on creative individuals found something counterintuitive. The most creative people weren't the ones who had the most ideas. They were the ones who stayed with a problem longer than everyone else. They resisted the temptation to jump to a solution. They sat with ambiguity. They tolerated the discomfort of not knowing. And because they stayed in that uncomfortable space longer, they eventually found solutions that others never reached, because everyone else had already moved on to something easier. This is patience applied to thinking, and it maps directly onto sales. The salesperson who sits with a client's objection instead of immediately overcoming it, who asks, "Tell me more about that," instead of launching into a rebuttal, that person will eventually understand the client's real concern. And the real concern is almost never the stated objection. The stated objection is it's too expensive. The real concern is I'm not sure this will work for my specific situation, or I need to justify this to my board, or I've been burned before by someone who promised exactly what you're promising. You'll never get to the real concern if you're in a hurry to overcome the surface objection. Patience is the only tool that gets you there. Let me tell you something personal, because I think it matters to say this out loud. I'm not someone who figured out patience early. I'm someone who learned it through the cost of not having it. I've rushed conversations that should have been slow. I've pushed for closes that weren't ready. I've sent follow-ups that communicated anxiety instead of value. And every single time, the result was the same. The deal fell apart, the relationship cooled, or I won the business, but at a price point that made it unsustainable. The turning point for me wasn't reading a book about patience. It was building a practice of daily reflection, sitting down at the end of each day and reviewing my interactions, not to judge myself, but to notice patterns. Where did I rush? Where did I react instead of respond? Where did I let anxiety drive the conversation? This kind of structured review, what you might call a daily debrief, is one of the most powerful tools for developing patience because it closes the feedback loop. You can't improve what you don't observe. And this is exactly why I built an AI system for sales training, because most salespeople never get honest, detailed feedback on their daily interactions. They get a quota and a manager who tells them to close harder. They never get someone or something that helps them look at a conversation and say, here's where you lost them. Here's where you shifted from serving to selling. Here's where your anxiety became visible. That kind of granular, non-judgmental feedback is what turns patience from a concept into a skill. Now, I want to address the philosophical layer here because I think it matters. There's a concept in the Talmudic tradition that wealth isn't just about accumulation, it's about what you create for others. The principle is straightforward. If you want abundance in your own life, create abundance for others first. And patience is central to this idea because creating real value for someone takes time. Quick transactions extract value. Long relationships create it. When you're patient with a client, you're not just being strategic. You're being respectful. You're saying, I trust you to make the right decision on your timeline, not mine. You're saying, my job isn't to convince you. My job is to make sure you have everything you need to decide well. That posture, that orientation towards service rather than extraction, is what separates professionals who build careers from hustlers who burn through markets. And this connects back to something fundamental about what sales actually is. Most people think of sales as persuasion, getting someone to do what you want, but that's a shallow and ultimately self-defeating definition. Real sales is the reduction of decision friction. It's helping someone see clearly enough to act on what they already know they need. It's removing doubt, providing clarity, and demonstrating trustworthiness. And you cannot do any of those things in a hurry. Think about the last time someone tried to rush you into a decision. How did it feel? Did it feel like service? Or did it feel like pressure? Did it increase your trust or decrease it? You already know the answer. And yet, when we switch to the other side of the interaction, when we're the ones selling, we somehow forget that the person across from us has the exact same response. Patience is the bridge between knowing this and living it. Let me give you some specific actions you can take, starting today, because I don't believe in advice that doesn't end with a concrete step. First, for the next week, add a 24-hour delay to every follow-up. If you feel the urge to send a check-in email, write it, but don't send it until tomorrow. Then reread it with fresh eyes. Ask yourself, does this add value or does this just relieve my anxiety? If it's the latter, rewrite it or delete it. Second, at the end of each day, write down 2 things. 1, a moment where you were patient and it served you. 2, a moment where you were impatient and it cost you. Do this for 30 days. You'll start seeing patterns that no sales training will ever teach you because they're unique to your psychology and your triggers. Third, pick one relationship, a prospect, a client, a colleague, where you've been pushing too hard. Step back. Stop selling. For the next 2 weeks, only add value to that relationship. Share something useful. Ask a question you've been too busy to ask. Listen without an agenda, and watch what happens. Fourth, build a patience list. This is a list of 5 to 10 high-value relationships or opportunities that you're nurturing over a 6-month to 12-month timeline. These aren't your hot leads. These are your long-term investments. Check in with them monthly. Add value quarterly, and expect nothing in return for at least 6 months. This list, maintained consistently, will become the single most valuable asset in your professional life within 2 years. Fifth, practice the pause in conversations. When someone raises an objection or says something you disagree with, don't respond immediately. Count to 3, let the silence sit for a moment, then respond. This tiny habit rewires the relationship between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. Over time, it gives you access to better thinking, better language, and better judgment in every high-stakes interaction. Here's what I want to leave you with. In a world that celebrates speed, hustle, and instant results, patience is the most counterintuitive competitive advantage you can develop. Not because it's easy, precisely because it's hard. Precisely because most people cannot do it. The market is flooded with people who are fast, aggressive, and eager. The market is starving for people who are thoughtful, steady, and trustworthy. Patience is what makes you the latter. And the deals that change your life, the partnerships, the clients, the opportunities that elevate everything, those almost never come from the first conversation. They come from the 15th. They come from the relationship you maintained when there was no immediate reward for maintaining it. They come from the trust you built by not rushing. Patience isn't waiting for something to happen. Patience is building something that takes time to see, and having the nerve to keep building when nobody's watching yet. The deals that transform your career are never the ones you rushed. They're the ones you earned by staying in the room longer than your anxiety wanted you to. If this gave you something to think about, follow along. I share frameworks like this regularly, and drop a comment below. Think about the last deal or opportunity you lost. Looking back honestly, did you lose it because of what you said, or because of when you said it?